Welcome to Imagine If, Inclusive Futures from Griffith University, an ongoing series of conversations that we're having with the most incredible minds, the most incredible people on the planet, who together with Griffith University is reimagining what disability might be, taking a future lens, taking the best of who we are and what we are from the past, and looking at what can still be achieved and what should be achieved. And today, I'm thrilled to be joined by one of the most incredible people on the planet, I think, around this space. So you can see his face scrunching. I love doing that in the beginning already. But I love Dwayne because of his energy. You know when he's in the room. I mean, you seriously know when he's in the room. And I'm sure in a couple of moments when I stop talking, you'll know he's in this room. So without any further ado, I want to introduce you to Dwayne Fernandes, or more importantly, to have him introduce himself to you.
Hi, I'm Dwayne Fernandes. Where do we start? I am a double below-knee amputee, missing a few fingers, have asthma, and this year I found out I have ADHD. I have a day job.
Like that.
Yeah, I have a day job.
You told me about that. You thought that was great.
Yeah, I'm AAA rated. AAA rated Dwayne, right? I have a day job, which is a manager HR projects in the state government in New South Wales. I have a side business where we play Dungeons and Dragons and Minecraft to help build social communication skills, minds of play. And because I'm a little bit of a sadist, I've also started another business after that, which is about the other side of it, which is basically what it's called disability inclusion led by driving disability inclusion led by people with lived experience. So Inclusion and Disability Expert Advisors is the title of that one. And that's getting launched on 3rd of December because,
Because you can.
Because why? It's the ADHD. I suspect it's the ADHD.
And that's not the end of it either. You'll hear lots more about Dwayne's adventures as we work our way through this conversation. My name's Maurice Mizzle. I'm an industry fellow with Griffith University and also foresight strategist. I belong to an alliance called Inclusive Futures, which is gathering the most incredible people around the notion of what still can be done. We're looking at research from an inside-out perspective. That is, we're taking people with lived experiences and asking them about the way the world might shape. What does the world still need to create and do to be inclusive? Taking their opportunities and heading them up with researchers around Griffith University, attaching our best and brightest to that possibility, and then growing a community around that. And those three layers really moving exponentially through the possibilities. And Dwayne and I will talk about a specific experience we've shared over the past few weeks where we modeled that and came up with some of the most incredible ideas. But on to our conversation. Dwayne, I want to take you back to something that I've read about your past, which I think informs maybe who you are and why you are. And it comes from the most incredible source always, which is our mother. So there was a comment made, and that was that when you moved from India to New Zealand as a child, the reality or the possibility of that was because the belief that in India, perhaps being a disabled person was going to be limiting. That there were things that you would not be able to create, have, and do in your life. And your mother, as all mothers do, knew exactly what you needed. And that was to find a space that really welcomed and enveloped you and let you grow. And she took you to New Zealand for that. And I love the comment, which I'm assuming is true because it was printed in the press, which makes it absolutely true always, is the notion that when you were granted the visa, that she made the comment, she double-checked with visa officers to make sure they knew her son had a disability. She found comfort in their response. Your son is not unable to do everything. It's just a few things he won't be able to do. I kind of think that stuck with you for a while.
Yeah, and I do what I can to keep reducing those barriers of all the things that I cannot do. But yeah, that's exactly the thinking, right? So Indian born in Bombay in 1985, and mom became a lioness after I came into her life. The attitudes and the cultural background that I'm in, it usually has a pretty negative understanding of what disability is in India. That being said, every country has a pretty bad basic understanding of disability inclusion. But at the time, it's a case of there's 1 billion of us. And what is the value of one young disabled boy in India? And so the thinking is we're kind of like pretty reasonable. My dad used to work in the airlines as a freight staff. Mom was working at Hext in Bombay, and the idea around migrating became a possibility. And they looked for countries that that migration was possible. So I think the usual four end up coming to mind: the US, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. Rejected by Australia, accepted by New Zealand. And that's the comment that was in our head, that there's a few different things. And I can tell you, in New Zealand, inclusion is something that you do feel, especially as a young person in that space. They had, at least at the time that I was in 96, 94, pre-amputation, it is a place that felt inclusive as a person with a disability.
And tell me more, because I think it's really imperative that we understand that environment really does nurture all of us as human beings to achieve our optimum. Tell me more about schooling, because you said that when you went to school, it was totally inclusive. I mean, you went to a mainstream school, as you absolutely should have and would have, but that the school went really, if not above and beyond, perhaps that's not the right word, but did everything that they could, from what I understand, to make sure that you were able to fully participate in everything.
Yep. So I went from, a city of 20 million people to Auckland City, which at the time, the entire country had less than 5 million, I think. It's not the same now from what I understand. We were sitting in like the major street at 7 p.m. and there was like one car that come past every hour. I'm like, what? Where do we go? What is this small town on the other side of the world? But when we went to school, was that in that space, there was a physical disability unit in Mount Roskill. So I went to school in Mount Roskill in Auckland, and it's not the posh of schools. It's just like the local school. And in there was you'd check into the physical disability unit in the morning, like your standard homeroom space, and you'd have classes with absolutely everybody in the school. And what that did was, it made have the same, there's no segregation, which meant that I had friends of every culture that was in that school. And what that meant is that it gave them the understanding that we exist and we're not going anywhere. We're part of society. And that is a two-way relationship that really helps kind of drive an inclusive community. Because if you grow up with people, they're your friends. And if you segregate yourself from a society, you don't understand that different perspective. And what seems to happen in many countries, and including this one, is that disability inclusion in schools is segregated. And so that's kind of what was very useful. It was always in the center of the unit, and it was good fun being in those type of school spaces. So
whizzing forward a few years, how do you get from there to world record stair climber?
Oh, geez. So this becomes a case of we have to go to a place that has jobs. New Zealand at the time, not many jobs, small, quiet place. So Dad came across to Sydney, and I had resistance migrating because New Zealand is green and Australia is brown. And, as a young boy that was in a co-ed school, going across to an all-boys school, my education was over here, the universities in Western Sydney. And they decided that the reason I did university is because the Indian parents, they're thinking about my future and thinking as a person who's a double amputee, what's a job that you can do regardless of your mobility? Accounting. You get an accounting degree. I'm like, I have ADHD. I found out this year. So I don't know how I survived that accounting degree, but I did the least accounting thing with it. And I became an insolvency accountant in 2007, which is in the MLC building in the city. And I was like, I changed my perspective on things. I used to cover my legs. I don't think I've worn long pants for the last 3 years, but first kind of job, being conservative, being quiet. But then Diego comes across and says, hey, you see that building across in that window, the Sydney Centre Point Tower? We're going to run up there. Do you want to come join us? I don't think he knew I had false legs. But I phoned up the stair climbing organization and I said, hey, has anybody run up your tower with false legs? I said false legs. That's the language that I used to use. They're like, I don't know. Let me get back to you. And 1 hour later, the most excited person on the phone comes up going, hey, please come. No one's done this before. It'll be a world first. We'd have media there. We'd have a whole bunch of other stuff there. Please come and run this thing. who am I to say no to a world first, right? And so 1,504 stairs, very unfit Indian guy. I found stairs all over the city to run up, and all I had to do was survive. And I ran up those stairs and in 3/4 shorts, and it has changed my life. Effectively, survived, made it to the top in like 20 minutes of stair climbing, and on the other side, on Friday, I was speaking to the one of the partners in the organization, going, you know what you should do? You should put like a logo on me and send me to New York because there's a stair climbing race over there. I thought that was hilarious. It was a joke. It was Friday. We were drinking. On Monday morning, he's like, have you done the memo yet? I'm like, what memo? New York. I'm like, okay, so we're doing this. And so that became the career of stair climbing from Sydney, Hong Kong, Vietnam, 10 other towers all over the world. And it became a case of disability awareness and built my confidence around speaking because you're the only amputee running upstairs. And these are records I've set for other people to go and beat, but they still haven't yet beat them. And some of them been there for over 10 years now.
And it looks like they did something incredible inside of you too, because it took you from somebody who, as you said, hid your legs for 3 years when you worked. And in fact, most people, I assume, around you wouldn't have known that you were a double amputee at all, did everything you can to hide it, to now wonderfully flaunting it.
Yeah.
It's become who you are, which incredibly it always was. And the difference, I think, and again, we're talking about inside out, and we'll come to this theme as we work our way through the next bit of the conversation too, is it really started inside of you.
Yeah. So the thing is, it's about how you identify, right? People identify in a variety of ways. I'm going to say, Morris, how do you identify?
I'm an aging male.
Aging male, what else?
I'm an aging male who loves pondering about what the world might look like.
Cool.
I'm a family man, have great kids, think about opportunities, think the world is wonderful.
Perfect. So in those 5 things, you're generally, what does religion come into the space? Are you a religious man?
I believe in cultural norms. I believe in the sanctity of religion. I don't necessarily believe in a deity.
Cool. And so what that does is that when people identify, like myself, I'm an Indian-born Australian that loves to travel. You notice disability is not in that top 5. And that's just the thing with most people. It's a conscious effort to actually identify yourself as a person with a disability, because that's what moves things forward. If you're able to identify something and able to then drive conversations around it, you can actually cause some change. And so that became the thing. People will identify with their religion, their sex, their gender, their preferences, their favorite thing to do before they'll identify someone with a disability. And that's true for the disability community too. And so that's what changed. That's the reason why I started identifying myself as a person with a disability, because if I can be out and talking about it loudly, it allows people to internalize some of who they are and allow them to make sure they reflect themselves in the data, be it the ABS statistics or the employee stats, whatever they need to kind of like realize that they're part of this community. Stop the stigma, so to speak.
And an imperative, I think just an imperative mindset for us all to have. So tell me about Minds at Play. I mean, this is a side hobby. Or it started off as a side hobby for you, like many other things I'm realizing.
Yep. Most things in life, it's like, here's the main quest. Oh, let's go do that side quest for a moment. And so I was in tolling in the tolling branch in state revenue, in Transport for New South Wales. And I had a pretty horrible manager, the worst. And I needed like a midweek break or something. And so I found an IT guy who's a friend of mine, and we're like, let's go find something to do middle of the week close by. We walked into a game shop and we found Dungeons and Dragons. And it was 4th edition. If anyone knows 4th edition, it's basically, think of it as advanced calculus, but you do it with paper. It's just not the right game mechanic, but it was a lot of fun. And it got me to, like, if I got to a Wednesday, it allowed me to kind of enjoy myself. I actually didn't like my boss so much that I actually played them as a character. Wood Elf Ranger. That character survived 2.5 years. It went from like level 1 to level 15, which is like a long campaign. What I realized is that when I was playing that character, I understood my boss. So much so that I would get into less arguments with them, less issues, less dramas. And that was awesome learning for myself. A pandemic hits. So I'm realizing D&D is useful for something. That's just lodged in my head, and I'm playing. It's my thing. I'm starting to go through the NDIS process, trying to get my leg funding, trying to figure out what value there is. And in the meantime, I become a godfather to my son, to my godchild, Aiden, who's going to be like doing a speech on international level with people with disability now. But I'm thinking about him going, he needs some assistance with building social communication skills. I can't always be there because I have a government job and other stuff, but okay, how can I know D&D is useful for him, but how can I make sure it is viable for him to have consistency of service? And thinking about that while trying to get my leg funding, I see this thing called innovative social participation. I'm like, Dan, does this sound like D&D to you? It's like, this sounds a little bit like D&D to me. And taking that idea, we put together a couple of slide decks and we started pitching to different organizations, corporations, NDIS organizations, aged care, and one of it stuck, Luke British Foundation in Penrith. And in like 2019, we established a company. We asked for grant funding. Horrible grant funding, but we started this. We had the basics of what we needed, and we pitched it to them, and they're like, "Let's give it a go. We'll give you 4 people." The pandemic really hit. All in-person stuff was gone, and then we said we could do this online. Jeff, the other partner that we hired on board, said, "Let's try to do this online." Figuring out a couple of camera angles, and I'm sitting here with a mat and all minis behind me that we'd organized and tested it. Said, yeah, we can do this online. In the first 2-hour session, that the social worker was sitting there after the players left, and we thought these boys were acting like regular teenage boys. Like we said, why don't you create a Discord account so that you know what you're doing and you're talking about when you're not in the game? And they're like, oh yeah, let me go do that. Excited when I did that. The support coordinator was crying, going, I've known these boys for years. I have never seen them interact this way. And then afterwards wanting to hang out and do posts, it had sold itself. We were like, oh, that aren't they just being regular boys? Like, no, apparently there's actual value in this. 4 become 8, 8 become 12, 12 become, we grew pretty quickly. We're currently sitting in a 2.5-year gap. We are now 342 players for D&D and Minecraft nationwide. And so it's 28 games masters and lots of fun stuff.
Incredible. And so moving us just forward a little bit from there, it's really how you and I came into each other's world. So at Griffith's Inclusive Futures, plugging it again.
As we should.
As we should, and as we do. We came to the notion that we want to look at research inside out. We wanted to look at research from the perspective of those with disability, those with end user experiences, and ask the question, what is it that still can be created? What opportunities exist that would make your world a better world for you? And then attach our researchers, et cetera, to it. We looked at how can we showcase that? How do we actually explain that to a world that doesn't get it as a model? And we looked at doing, and have done now over the last couple of months, an accelerator program, an innovation program specifically around disability. And in this case, play, the notion of recreation, play and sport for those with disability. How can we improve that world so that people with a disability of all kinds, all flavors, can participate to their extent, to their fullness?
Absolutely.
And one of the people that put their hand up for this quest to join one of our pitch teams and come up with an incredible idea was you.
Oh yeah, the really good team is a good mix of Tim, who's created a sport called wheelchair cross, which is think skateboarding but in a wheelchair in a bowl. That images are next level. We have Maretta, we have a ballet instructor, we have Vanessa, people from like all these different spaces that you would normally not meet. And so that meeting of these minds have been very useful. And then you put us on a project, right? A North Star. How do you get people with disabilities to engage in regular sport? And so our pivot was, well, how do you get the gaming companies to send people with disability to do regular sport and make them feel that they've improved their organization? I kind of pivoted in my own little sideway. And then the answer became fairly simple. It's a case of gaming has incentives built within it. And so within that space, we think about how can I put incentives into the game that causes them to go do physical regular exercise.
So we're taking them from online, where you've now socialized them, they're comfortable, they're talking with each other, they're engaging, they're learning all the things you've spoken about before, and we're kind of pushing them out of the nest. We're pushing them into the physical real world.
Correct. And we're making them sweaty, which is what you need. Sweaty makes happy people.
Sweaty boys are not so sure about, but never mind.
But sweat and shower, but you need them to sweat because then you add longevity and everything else. And so the case of how do you make those relationships occur? Because we've gone through a pandemic and everyone's stuck online. And so we know where the attention is. It's just about how do you get them to go to send them there. And that became the pivot, and that becomes the big pitch. And so now I think we're looking to do a pilot in the space of my community and my players. And we're going to see what type of incentives and we can put into place that'll cause them to do regular physical activity. And that's going to be an interesting thing to see. Once we have the data from that, we can then go, hey, game companies, if you want do this. Maybe you want to partner with this external third-person app that we'll put together that'll help you facilitate to tell you who's actually doing regular physical activity and who's not, and validate those assumptions. But that's the kind of thing. And if you look at those elements, if you do it for the disability community, and there's always been the history of this, right? Because we're a fringe part of it. When you do it for the disability community, you're actually improving all of society. If I can give you an incentive to improve your gaming, well, everybody loves gaming, so they'll do some physical activity too. And so suddenly you'll end up with that type of space. And if you think about all the other things in history that have kind of moved us forward, when's the last time you turned up the volume on your phone as you're scrolling? No, you're reading the subtitles. Who's that for? Toothbrushes, electric toothbrushes. You bedridden and in a palliative care, because that was the market. No, my child has it, I have it, a whole bunch of us have it because it's a good product. It's a good product because it's focused on the disability community. And research in the space is absolutely vital because we know the length of time it takes from research to practical use. And engaging with the fringe communities such as ourselves allows a better inclusive society.
And as we agreed with each other, I mean, inclusivity can only be a good thing. It doesn't matter inclusivity of what. I mean, that whole notion of inclusivity.
It's a wide
as you
space.
Experienced in New Zealand, as you experienced at work, and again, your history just is littered in the right sense with inclusivity and models of that. And where you don't find it, creating it for yourself.
Creating it for yourself, yeah. Yeah.
As part of this, you've told me about the social model of disability. It kind of drives your thinking. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So I find myself in state government after that entire journey of being a business analyst and insolvency accountant and all these other things. I'm finding that my community is not there. It's not in the organization. Somehow I've progressed to a stage at like a reasonable grade level. I'm not seeing my community, people with disabilities, and ask myself why. And so I start to influence and ask questions around the social model, around what are people doing around disability inclusion, and then trying to explain it to people, right? Because there's a few different models around the social, around disability. There's a charity model, there's a medical model. A medical model is you have a disability, we apply a cure to it, and you no longer have a disability. Well, in society, that's not going to happen. They tried that before. It's called eugenics, and there was a world war about it. And you don't like you kind of you don't want any of that stuff. So the social model, correct. The social model of disability, and the way it's written is disability. It's a formula. I love a formula. What is it? Disability equals conditions plus barriers. And the conditions are I'm missing a few fingers, missing a few legs. The barriers, though, are what make the disability. So the question is, in the social model of disability, I have a mobility and a dexterity-based disability. And the disability community is wide, right? So there's physical, there's intellectual, there's mental, there's sensory, there's neurological, there's learning disabilities, there's physical disfigurement, there's immunology. We'll know a lot about immunology because of long COVID nowadays. But understanding all of that by the general person, it's too much. It's too much. But you can understand the formula of conditions, and you want to keep into those broad conditions. Those conditions could be hearing, sight, mobility, think, touch, dexterity, and height. If you think about it from your interactions with society, then you can eliminate disability because the barriers are no longer there. If you want to think about it from that perspective, someone's missing an arm and they need to order a cup of coffee. They're on their phone. How is that interaction going to go? And so if you want to scale up, a mother is holding a child, they're on their phone and they need to order a cup of coffee. You see the scale up issue? And that's that. And when you look at those processes, and the good thing about disability, that social model of disability, is that the barriers are built by people, which means they can always be undone. but it's also about the cost about when you do it, right? And so if you're not talking to people with disability at a nice early stage, the retrofit cost, that's skyrocketing. There's a good example of that if you want, happy for me to share.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Queensland had a fun example. 2018, one person in a wheelchair sued the Queensland government for inaccessible rolling stock trains, the NRG trains. Guess the payout. Guess the accessible payout figure.
Millions.
How many? Give me a number.
10.
Higher.
20.
Higher.
Oh, this is like Jeopardy. What do I win at the end? So let's go for 50.
Higher.
100.
Higher.
Wow. 250.
Yeah. So the initial ruling
we're talking about.
Yeah, 250. What I'm saying is that the initial ruling was at $500 million.
Wow.
Yeah, this is a judge found that thing, and then they found out that they could do efficiency thing and reduce it down to $350 million. The question is speaking to a person with a disability going to cost you $350 million? And when you erase the design, no. And the thing is, the entire organization knew that they were non-compliant of the legislation. We have some really good, strong disability legislation here, comparatively speaking to the rest of the world. And so you think about it, when you involve the disability community, if you involve us at the end, all we have is sticks to throw at you. But you involve us at the beginning, and not only that, the 350, think about the projects that would fall over if you projected that the legal cost is going to be that. If you involve us at the beginning, you end up with a product that is actually a wider use than you think. So you end up with better engagement, better facilitation. You're helping people who are mothers in prams and people with low vision and a whole bunch of other things that people are not paying attention is the same as low vision. People who've got headphones on is the same as people who've got hearing aids. And so you're making sure it's safer for a wider community. And so you involve us at an earlier stage, or there's a stick, and it's the same activity. It's the same. You talk to us now, you talk to us later. Same activity. It's a carrot or a stick based on what type of organization you are.
And I'm going to put the plug in again, and that's exactly why Inclusive Futures at Griffiths exists, because we talk from day one about being user-centric, about asking the questions. In this model, as you've given it to us, how do you get on and off a train? I mean, how do you get on and off a tram? What does it look like in your world? And then what do we have now? And then how do we make the two perfectly aligned?
Yeah, and the good thing about something like accessibility and disability inclusion is that you don't actually need to have lived experience to build it.
Or to benefit.
Yeah, the example I can give you is Sydney Metro. I was a project officer disability employment in that space. And at the time that I was in that area, Sydney Metro had just launched its train. It's metro service train. It has very wide global accessibility appeal. It is a person who's a wheelchair user, a person who's a blind user can utilize the entire service end to end without additional service needs, without additional employees. There's not even a train driver in there. The entire service works end to end seamlessly. At the time, I was looking at the employee stats of that organization. There was 0 people identified as people with disability in the organization. 0. I'm like, it blew my mind. I'm like, how is that possible? How is it that, and then you understand, it's about the thinking about these type of formulaic approaches and understanding the user cases and things of that nature. Now, could it be a little bit better if they had people with disabilities? The answer is yes, it is. There was a specific area about the gates, the gates and the boom gates. If you had a carer with you, it would close behind you and your carer would be stuck on the other side. And that's a fairly minor thing. It was fairly minor thing comparatively speaking to other assets, right?
Oh, no.
And so that becomes not at the train level, but at the train station level. Yeah. So you had to have a person involved. And so the better you make things, the more accessible you make things, the more independence and dignity you're giving to the community. And you want that to occur. Because my friend Damo and myself used to catch a train to Woy Woy on a regional train, and the train station was inaccessible. But we were 2 independent young guys, and he's a wheelchair user, so he'd carry his bag in one hand and drag his wheelchair, and he'd bum shuffle down the stairs to get to where we need to go. And that was the dignity that was afforded to us. But when you build things correctly, you end up with a lot more value.
So I want to invoke something I always invoke in these conversations, and that's because I'm a foresight strategist, because I live in the future a lot. I want to take us forward a couple of years, maybe a decade or so. We've talked about the way the world was when you grew up. We talked about inclusivity. I also think importantly, we talked about how you claiming who you are was so important in you becoming who you are today. And now we've talked about the way that the world can evolve. So the physical environment, the way that that can change itself to make it possible for everybody to be their best version. But let's go forward about 5 or 10 years from now, maybe to 2030, somewhere in between. What do you think disability, the brand disability, looks like in 2030?
Okay. Brand disability in 2030. Now, going back in time, you understand the word disability was never the word. It's not a unifying word.
Yeah.
It's still not a unifying word,
Yeah.
right? You compare it to the UK versus the US. Depends on how much stigma the word disability has, based on the country and what your association with it is. It's either you embrace it. The UK model is I am disability first language, and the US model is no, anything but that word, right? Call me something else, call me ability, call me accept. And the issue
That's
with this
such
is
an important thing, Dwayne, because I grapple with that. I grapple with that. As somebody who doesn't have a disability, I hate the word. I don't like it at all. I didn't use it, but I've been told over the last little while that I should be using it.
Yeah.
That it has some strength in the word. And there are two camps, as you say. I get those that are wildly against it and berate me, as they should, for using the word. How dare you? And
How
they
dare
get
you?
those people that say
But
the
those
word
aren't
is a
the ones.
label, it's championing.
But are those people with disabilities?
Yes.
Who are berating you?
And the answer is yes to both. I mean, yes to people with disability, people who don't have a disability. So I'm always hesitant when the word comes out of my mouth, but I don't know what other word should come out.
Correct. And so with that space, I used to moderate a club in Clubhouse, that app that was a thing during the pandemic.
Wasn't it?
And I used to host a thing called Disability Isn't a Dirty Word, and it was a podcast, and people from all over the space used to come, and we would debate what the right word is, what the future could be in that space. And people are still divided because people are people. In UK, in Dubai, I got called a person of determination. And at the time, I was about to run up some stairs and I was very unfit. So I was determined to get to the top. And my association with that word at the time was, yeah, I'm okay with it. But then you go and look at it from the perspective of what the history in that space is. The language around disability inclusion over there is very colorful. It is, it's the words I'm not going to say over here. So when you get the option to be called a person of determination compared to the other colorful languages out there, you choose that. And so you then identify that and you get champion. And so that's what it is from that local spaces. And so people bite each other's heads off in the space. I actually made a mistake in this area. I created something called the Church of Diffability. Basically, during a pandemic, Scott Morrison was doing, religious discrimination bill while Sydney was burning. I got annoyed at the entire situation, realizing that my community was going to suffer with the fact that almost every religion could say something. And based on the religions that are there too, you're indoctrinated about how stigmatized the disability community is, bad karma, miracles through them and all those other areas. So I'm like, cool, I'm going to create a religion. But the word diffability is problematic. And that's something that's my name's there. You can see the videos. It's all existing. And that's the wrong language. And that's the wrong language for right now. The words, when I was younger, it was the Crippled Children's Society, and that was normal. You'd go to...
and we had the Royal Spastic Society.
Correct. And we all know these terms existed, but those are the terms now. The question is, where is the word disability in 2030? I suspect... up till the Paralympic movement and things of that nature. Have you heard the word para-astronaut too? Where are they going to paraspace?
Oh, we're coming to that. Hold on, viewers and listeners. We're going to talk about that in just a moment.
Yeah, but and so the thing is with this space is that I see us aligning a little bit more towards the word disability. And the movement is there. There's enough large corporations and thinking that's there. It's just about making sure the US gets dragged across accordingly, and the Middle Eastern countries can do the same. It is possible that we might align to the word disability, but it's also very possible that people go, actually, no. The word DIS, those negative, the wording structure of it is still not where it is. It's possible that we might go completely separate, but it's okay. long as you have the intention that the community needs to be supported, and you can put yourself under one flag. And that's the issue. That is, we're a large minority, but we don't take ourselves under one flag. And when we don't take ourselves under one flag, we don't have the power to drive the change that we want to drive. And so that becomes the issue. If you want us to drive better change, what you need to do is actually have us all under one flag.
So I'm a pragmatic optimist. I don't understand why the word has to exist in any shape or form. Why aren't we just humans? And I know there's no answer to that. I'm not looking for you to agree or disagree, but I don't know why the word has to exist. If we have to label, it doesn't matter what we call it. I mean, we can call it, leaves, plants, or whatever. Correct, it doesn't matter. We're still segregating. We're not being inclusive because we are saying by the labeling of it that we are something different, not better or worse necessarily, but something different from everybody else that doesn't have that label. It doesn't make sense to me.
That gets done for cultural linguistic diverse people, Aboriginal people. But
absolutely.
The issue, and so the labels are there because when you can put a banner to yourself, and it's just the way how society works. If you're all human, then everybody gets the same thing. But when you notice patterns of inclusion and things of the nature, ideally, when we get ourselves off this planet, we're all considered human and we stay that way. But right now on Earth, because we've drawn borders and barriers, that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, I can hope one day. I mean, maybe not in my lifetime, but we hope the day's there. And that's why I ask about 2030 and I ask about the generations ahead. I think, again, pragmatic optimist, I think the next generations are going into a golden age. I know that we're living through difficult times. I get all of that.
Identity is a little more fluid. Yeah.
But I honestly think that the world is shaping up to be very, very different. You've talked about a landscape where we have people with disability, people with ability playing games online. That wasn't a space that was available 10 or 15 years ago. There was no ease of being who you are or who you want to be in an online space. And then possibly through an involvement with Griffith or somebody else taking that community that you've formed online, offline. I think there are lots of things ahead. I think there's lots of possibilities around work, the notion of work and disassembling work from being a fixed place, fixed time activity where it's repetitive into a series of tasks or activities, which gives everybody the opportunity to use the skill that they have to the best advantage when and where they can.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of the world that, on my soap opera hall, that's kind of the world I think that we're moving into. I'm hoping we're moving into. I'm hoping these conversations might nudge us a little bit into. And I say that because all those generations, the X's, the Y's, the Z's, the A's, all of that, what do you think that they will have as a world of disability?
It all depends on how much they let themselves augmented with technology, right? And that's always been the thing, right? We're always augmenting ourselves with technology. The future is, the population changes and we're going to have a situation of a little bit of a climate crisis and things of that nature in place. So it's about, can we survive in harsh climates? And what are we doing to make sure we're resilient in that space? The future expectations of those generations is that it may not, we might have border issues. We might have a change of political ideal, right? It's all about who has power and who can control that power. Now, generally, when you have power, you don't want to be inclusive because second you are, it dissipates. And so these things generally have an issue in alignment. And I can tell you, it is possible that humans are humans. They'll always make the same mistakes. It's as long as they're not aware of their past. And it feels like the present is very engaging. Therefore, the past is a little bit forgotten in some areas. And it is possible that mistakes will be repeated. And so I'm a hopeful man, but for that to be the case, we need to make sure that the communities are protected. And the way you protect it is to make sure that there is money and power associated with that. And the disability community have never really had money and power associated with it. That is something that in this country, with something like an NDIS organization, it allows for that thing to be evened up a bit more. But people understand the value of money and people understand the value of power. And as long as the ideals are not about it's us versus them, we'll have the same situations. Just hopefully with better technology and more interesting games.
And I would throw into that, which I know is the outcome of money and power, the ability to have a voice. I mean, to be heard. And when you are heard, it's very difficult for people to be able to say that you are other. I mean, if you are heard, if you are included, if you are part of society, then you really must be counted. The external environment that often forms the barriers to what you can do, as your mother said so eloquently when she moved you to New Zealand, the physical barriers disappear. The mental ones, as you've said, also can begin to disappear. And the world becomes a world where possibility abounds. And on that, I want to take us into your future adventure. You're about to go somewhere where very few people go, or have gone so far anyway.
Let's talk about the future. Okay, so I'm about to do Mission Astro Access. I'm one of 16 people around the world. This is flight number 2. There are people with disabilities.
Here.
No. Let me explain this thing. So I'm about to go into zero G environment to do experiments on disability inclusion for my community. And so what that is that we are in a plane that does parabolic flights, and in those zero G phases, I am doing experiments around what does it mean for mobility and coordination in a zero G environment. Does someone with these awesome legs here on Earth have equal to or greater than mobility in a zero G environment? So my question comes from a very fiscal perspective. I'm actually trying to drive the social model of disability really intensely, because if I can say that a person with mobility and dexterity issues in a zero G environment has the same level of mobility and dexterity or greater than you in a zero G environment, why are you sending all these people up with legs into space? Their legs have no use in space. You know what's the equivalent of a leg? A carabiner, a hook. Done. You're not spacewalking. You're using your shoulder muscles. Guess whose shoulder muscles are really good here on Earth? A whole bunch of Paralympic athletes. So my questions around these experiments are around how do you drive the social model of disability forward? And it's a case of, if I can prove a fiscal reason to send people with disabilities up there, then yes. And so the announcement of ESA's para-astronaut to identify the feasibility of it, I think we'll be able to answer a lot of the mobility and dexterity questions within these 15 parabolic flights on 14th of December, which is the 50th anniversary of the Apollo landing. And so I'm excited to be part of this group of people who are doing this amazing work. There are people who are visual, who are dealing with visual issues, people who are working on hearing and sign language in a zero G space. It's going to be chaotic and lovely, and I'm going to meet a whole bunch of amazing people. And I hope we get to move science forward a little bit.
I know you will. And now you know exactly why I was looking forward to the conversation with Dwayne today. There's never a dull moment when you think there is, as he says, he takes another pivot and goes another direction. So thank you very, very much for joining us in this Inclusive Futures What If conversation. The conversation, I believe, as we've talked about, really starts from the inside out in many ways, with our research, of course, as we said, being user-centric, but also with us having a full belief of who we are as human beings and entitled to a world, entitled to access the world to its fullest capacity for each of us. And you've shown us how where the world wasn't perhaps as accommodating as it could be, where you literally belted down the door, climbed the stairs, and now have gone into space to make sure it is. So I thank you for that, and I thank you for joining us. I look forward to future conversations with you. And to our audience, thank you very much for joining us in this conversation, in this chat. We'd love you to continue the conversation afterwards. We'd love you to join us in the conversation, Inclusive Futures, and Dwayne will put some links to his sites and his socials as well. Please continue the conversation. It's a vital one. Until we meet again, have an incredible future and dream audaciously about what tomorrow can look like. Over and out. See you next time.
See you around.